Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the York County School Board's work session for May 4th, 2020. I want to thank those that are working behind the scenes, especially our IT department and video services that assist us as we navigate through the different way of holding our meetings that we're doing currently. We're very fortunate to have this technology available that allows us the capability to join our community by way of these virtual meetings. So before we start, there's just some housekeeping things we need to go through. Each board member will now state their remote location as required by code. Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes, I'm at 111 Ivy Arch, Yorktown, Virginia, 23693.
Wonderful. Ms. Geralds?
Laurel Garrels, 100 Leanne Court, Yorktown, Virginia, 23692.
And Mr. Schaefer?
Mark Schaefer, 115 Catawba Court, Williamsburg, 23185.
Great. Mr. Myatt?
105 Kiskiak Turn, 23693.
And I'm Jimmy Richardson, coming to you remotely from 710 Ship Point Road, Yorktown, Virginia, 23692. So just one other housekeeping note that all board members are participating in this work session remotely through electronic communication pursuant to Resolution 20-19. That authorizes board meetings through electronic communication without physically assembled quorum and in compliance with York County Ordinance 20-11 during this pendency of Ordinance 20-11 and the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. We are streaming live video of our meeting through the Division YouTube channel for our work session this evening. Now, since this is the first day of the first week of Teacher Appreciation Week, the board would like to extend their thanks and appreciation to all of our teachers and our staff for the hard work they're doing. And we know they're really have struggled in the beginning, I'm sure, with this new way of teaching. And hopefully it's getting better with them as time goes on. But we certainly do appreciate their hard work, and we do appreciate our teachers and staff. So I'd also like to mention that our board meeting documents are available by logging on to Board Docs via our YCSD website at yorkcountyschools.org. So we have several presentations this evening, so we're going to move on ahead to those. And the first one is strategic plan update. And Dr. Shandor, I believe we have two for Goal 4 objective, cultural awareness and cultural learning. So I'll turn it over to you.
We do. Good evening, and good evening, board members. First, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Aaron Butler, Director of School Administration, to provide both of these strategic plan updates. Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Richardson, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity this evening to provide an update on strategic plan Goal 4, objectives 2 and 3, cultural learning. I am pleased to share the actions taken to implement objectives 2 and 3, which are related to evidence-based professional development and learning opportunities focused on cultural learning and respect for students and families of diverse cultures.
And ask technology if they can step in. I'm not sure if the slide is froze. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Are you done?
I think we may have lost audio for a second there as well.
Okay, I'm sorry. So on the next slide, the Committee for Equity and Diversity was formed during the 2018-19 school year to assist with the implementation of the previously mentioned strategic plan goals. The committee is composed of parents, administrators, teachers, school counselors, and school board office staff, which meet on a regular basis to review and discuss division data and provide recommendations and suggestions to help with the attainment of strategic plans. Last year, the committee made two recommendations related to Goal 4. One was to institute ongoing and comprehensive professional development opportunities with a focus on cultural learning, equity, and diversity. The second was to allocate division funds for school-based and division-wide interventions and supports to address disproportionality and achievement gaps. Based on the feedback from the committee, the instruction, student services, and school administration departments formed a collaborative partnership to address the strategic plan objectives. From that partnership, activities and programs were implemented that fall within 3 categories that I will review with you this evening. 1 is division level collaboration, 2 is professional development opportunities, and 3, classroom-based culturally responsive resources and activities. For the past 2 years, the school division has participated in the Virginia Tiered Systems of Support, which is a VDOE grant-funded program. One of the requirements of the grant is that the division create a division-level leadership team, which is intended to review and monitor student discipline and school climate data, and use that information to develop professional development opportunities for staff. This year, the DLT used information from the Department of Criminal Justice Secondary School Climate Survey, and they also used information from the School-Wide Information System, which we call SWIS. And we used that data to design several professional development learning opportunities for staff. As you can see in the pictures here, using that VTSS framework, we developed 4 types of professional development which were provided during the first half of the school year. 1 focused on family engagement to make sure that our schools were providing the right types of environments to welcome all students and families into their buildings. 2nd was classroom systems, which looked more at the procedures and things that teachers do every day in their classrooms to make sure that students are all treated fairly and equitably in the classroom. We looked at culturally responsive approaches. So in case there's any types of misunderstandings with cultural differences, those things are put into place in each classroom. And then finally, with help from the Virginia Department of Education and Student Services, we provided training on trauma-informed classroom practices to try to help those students who have had adverse experiences in their background to provide a supporting and nurturing environment for all students. In addition to that, Katie Gaylord, the school counseling lead, has worked with certified professionals to develop a mindfulness training cohort for teachers and counselors. This cohort is trained in mindfulness and stress reduction techniques to assist in training classroom teachers to better support their students in self-regulation and stress management. She has worked with Studio South Yoga and partnered with YCSD to provide free weekly virtual yoga classes for all employees twice a week, and also to work with Bacon Street and other organizations in our community to work on videos to help staff and families who are in need. In addition to these services, Student Services has also developed training modules focused on first aid mental health to assist teachers in identifying potentially adverse risk factors, allowing them to make referrals for student support. At the division level, we participated in several professional developments. One in the summer before school started, we participated in the Region 2 Equity Conference. Representatives from all of our schools, including members of our school board office staff, participated in the Virginia Beach Regional Program that looked at equity and diversity matters throughout our region. In January, the instruction department under Christina Head and Dr. David Wrights developed a professional development that focused on equity. So all elementary school teachers and middle school teachers participated in the morning session, which you see in the picture on the screen, where they received that type training from our contacts from the Virginia Department of Education and from TTAC. In January, our paraeducators participated in the Professional Development Academy, where that same focus on equity and on mindfulness and stress reduction was provided. And for any staff that missed the training in January, we had a makeup session in March for those teachers on these same topics. To support classroom instruction and integrate cultural learning, the instruction department purchased several sets of books for each school, which looked at the unique backgrounds of people from diverse backgrounds, which include ethnicity, language, disabilities, and nationalities. Students engaged in these classroom-based activities and were able to dialogue on the different themes and content in these books. In addition, schools took time to highlight state and local history to illustrate how the different members of our diverse community have made contributions to make York County a special place to live and work, as well as the contributions of others throughout our nation and world. As we prepare to move forward, we continue to plan to use the interdepartmental collaboration between our 3 departments. When we're able to meet again in regular session, we will reconvene the Committee for Equity and Diversity and the Virginia Tiered System of Support leadership team. Working as a collaborative group, we will look at professional development opportunities for staff and try to integrate that into our regular professional development plan. And we will also continue to review instructional resources that support cultural learning experiences for students in the classroom. Thank you for this opportunity to present updates to strategic plan. I am now available for questions.
Okay, any questions from board members?
It's not a question. I just want to say that I'm proud to see that there's a push for mindfulness and to support student needs for mental health resources, especially when we're able to get back into the building. Students get used to the classroom setting again. It's nice to see that that's still a forethought in York County's mind.
So I have one comment, Dr. Butler, and I know I've asked this question of Dr. Shandor in the past about our Swiss data, and I know it's been a long time coming. We finally got at least a year's worth of data, and my understanding is it didn't show any big disparity between the subgroups of students on discipline. Is that my understanding?
So you know, the school year was interrupted, but prior to the second semester, when we pulled the data for the first quarter and for second quarter, we had seen tremendous reduction in the disparity between our ethnic groups. As I showed last year in our data, there was some slight discrepancy for our African-American students, but that gap had very much narrowed, so it was more proportional when we looked at the data for first quarter. There actually was no disproportionality. Everything matched up with proportions as they should. And then second semester, that trend was continuing. And so we are going to prepare to look at that as we move forward.
Right. You mean second quarter or second semester, Dr. Butler?
Second quarter.
Okay. Thank you very much. If no other questions, we'll move ahead to our next presentation. And thank you for that presentation, Dr. Butler. I appreciate all that hard work and that information. We're going to move ahead to our FY21 meal prices, Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Again, Dr. Butler, thank you for your work on those presentations and the work pushing forward for our students. Next, we have Ms. Cheryl Parr, Associate Director of School Administration. She's going to provide us with some details regarding federal and state meal price adjustments. I'll turn it over to Ms. Parr.
Good evening, Mr. Richardson, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. Tonight, I will provide an update for you about COVID-19 food distribution efforts, as well as background information regarding proposed changes to our meal prices for next school year. Since the first day of our closure, we have continued to serve both nutritious and tasty meals to our students. As of today, we have served over 90,000 breakfast and lunch meals to YCSD families, something that we all should be very proud of. Our hardworking food services team prepares multiple meals at a time, and then these are distributed at 3 distribution sites. Site locations are Magruder Elementary, Tab High, and York High, and we serve on Mondays and Thursdays from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock for our families. A curbside grab-and-go process eliminates as much contact as possible. Families unable to come to our sites contact us by phone or by email, and then they make arrangements for home delivery. We're delivering approximately 150 meal bags to students each day by bus. These bags translate to about 900 meals that are delivered. When school is in session, our division participates in the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program by following the United States Department of Agriculture and Virginia Department of Education guidelines. Sodexo is our current food service vendor, and last year prepared nearly 1 million meals. School nutrition, of course, is very important to all of us, and it's because of the correlation between good nutrition and academic progress. School breakfast programs, such as breakfast in the classroom in our elementary schools and grab-and-go breakfast in our secondary schools, works really well to start off our academic day. The opportunity to eat a balanced lunch then allows our students to receive the nutrition they need to continue academic learning in the afternoon. Current lunch prices are $2.70 for our elementary students and $2.80 for our secondary students. YCSD receives federal reimbursement for each type of lunch that is served in the amounts that you see here. The difference in the amount of reimbursement we receive for a free lunch and a paid lunch is $3.09. Federal regulations require school divisions to adjust lunch prices if less than $3.09 was charged for a paid lunch during the 2019-2020 school year. There's two ways that we can meet this federal requirement. We can increase our paid meal prices or utilize other non-federal funds to supplement the school food service account. The amount of the adjustment is determined by using the federally required paid lunch equity tool. That's provided by the school nutrition department at the VDOE. And by using this tool, we have determined that a 30-cent increase in the price of breakfast and lunch is recommended. However, because we predict that we will have a positive ending balance in the school food service account for this year, a 5-cent only increase is recommended to the price of breakfast and lunch for students and adults for next year. This increase will allow us to maintain the VDOE required 3-month operating fund balance in the food service account, as well as account for rising food costs. This table that you see here provides information about previous meal price increases for the past 5 years. I usually in this presentation provide a comparative meal price chart from surrounding divisions. However, because of COVID-19, most divisions are still in the process of figuring out and determining changes to their prices. We are aware, however, that a couple of neighboring divisions plan to increase and make adjustments by either 5 or 10 cents. The next table that you see here provides information about current and proposed prices for elementary meals. Please note that reduced meal prices will remain 30 cents for breakfast and 40 cents for lunch. Proposed increases for adult meals is also 5 cents, but no increase is recommended for this next year for the price of milk. This secondary meal price table provides information about current and proposed prices for secondary students. Again, please note that reduced meal prices will remain the same. A request for approval of this proposed meal price increase will come before you at the next regular meeting. Thank you, and I'm happy now to answer any questions that you may have.
Board members have any questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to say congratulations on being able to get that many meals out a week. I know I've seen a lot of positive feedback on social media for families that are benefiting from that. So thank you for all the hard work and all the setup it takes and all that. So great job.
Thank you. We're very proud of our efforts.
Yeah, I know it's been a big help for those families, especially where the parents are out of work and they're struggling to make ends meet. So I'm glad we're able to help with that. So thank you, Ms. Carr, for that presentation. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to move into our CIP update. Dr. Shandor, CIP update for 21 to 26.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Bowen, our Chief Financial Officer, is going to provide an update to the capital improvements program. There's some pretty significant changes to this, so we're going to take some time and go through. And again, I would offer, ask as many questions as you would like related to the specific projects related to the facility. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, Mr. Richardson, members of the board. This evening, I have a few presentations, updates and revisions to the 21-26 capital improvements plan, our FY21 and 20 budgets, and also an update on the YCSD health insurance plan. As you know, these are uncertain economic times, and we've been working with our county partners on updates to our CIP and operating budgets to account for lower projections and local revenue. For the CIP improvement plan, board members, you'll remember that in January you adopted the 21-26 CIP plan. And while the plan provides projections for 6 years, the board, what you approve is actually funding for the projects and funding for FY21. So the FY21 plan adopted in January was based on a budget of about $13.2 million, and 12.7 million of that would have come from county funding. However, in light of the new economic updates and revisions to local funding, the county has informed us that the CIP commitment for next year is only $1 million. So this created a few challenges for us. And there were two projects with phase two or year two add-ons this summer, and then a third project that needed to be added. So let me move into the details of those CIP projects. So here you'll see a number of items in red line. These are projects that, these are the changes. So and begin with Coventry here, we had 440,000 initially allocated in FY21, and that project actually came in a little less. We've moved that project to FY20E because that project now will be covered by cash instead of by the bonds or other local funding. Projects like Dare Elementary, we see the projects have been shifted out. That's the case for most of these projects. However, any project that is in red line and has not been shifted to the right, it's been shifted to FY20 because those projects now will be paid for by funds already appropriated to the school division for capital projects. So let me address Seaford Elementary. This project was $580,000. It was be funded out of revenue stabilization funds or cash. In talking and working with our local government, they encouraged us to continue with some of the funding there and basically to continue with the conceptual drawings of Seaford Elementary, because that is a project that we need to move forward on. However, we don't have the sufficient funds to continue with the A&E and the construction of the renovation there. So we've taken 355,000 of the 580. We've reallocated those funds to other projects. We'll continue to the next slide. There's no changes to FY20 for the middle school project. So if we can move to the Grafton Complex. So you'll see here in FY21, we had $2.2 million to close out phase two or year two of this project. The 880,000 there now incorporates the total funds needed to complete year two. This is funds that we've moved the FY21 funding to FY20 because this is a project that we had started as a result of the Grafton Complex fire. So we had some funding available in FY20E to jumpstart the FY21 project in June. And however, when our funding was reduced for FY21, we had to find available other funds, and we're using cash money now to cover the year two of that project. Grafton Complex, the second project here is to replace the PA and intercom system. This is the original intercom and PA system that came with the school when we built it back in the mid-90s. We've had challenges with this system. Mr. Dolak and his team have done a tremendous job keeping this project going. However, at the end of phase one, we started to encounter additional problems with it that became more challenging. And then with the complex fire, it created more challenges. We don't believe that we'll be able to get the system up and running at the beginning of next school year. So we need to, while the school is currently torn apart under renovation, that we need to replace this. This is a safety and security issue. So we already have the bids back. Came in just under $500,000. So that's a good figure. And this will enable us to complete this project while the crews are actually working on that complex today. So we can go to the next slide. So a number of changes here, but the one I want to focus on is the York High replace and coat the low slope roof. The $1.6 million that we have allocated here was funding that was available in FY20. We received a favorable bid on this project and came under bid. And we were very hopeful that we would complete this project this year, phase one and phase two. The vendor had proposed doing that. However, due to the short the shortfall we had in FY21 with funding, we, Dr. Carroll, Mr. Shearhart, and I decided that this was a project that we could postpone into the future year, and we could then capture that $1.6 million and reallocate that to other projects. And that 1.6 million largely is covering the year 2 of the Grafton complex. If we can go to the last project. So on the last here, the one I have with the arrow, if you see in FY21, that's the $1 million that we have funding for, and it's for modular classrooms. And looking at the CIP and reprioritizing projects, Dr. Carroll believes that we can get this, we can get the temporary modulars that we need under the $1 million. We're looking at about $400,000 to $500,000. So that will give us $500,000 to $600,000 in FY21 in case there is another situation or issue that comes up in our buildings and we need to address it. But more importantly, if we have that funding available, then we'll be able to go back to address the startup of the York High roof project that we currently are under contract with. So that's the update on the CIP, and this will be a revision that you'll be approving at the May work session. I'm sorry, at the May business meeting. Any questions?
I just have one comment, Mr. Bowen, and I just want to make this, I guess, for people that may be watching there. It's not a fact that, and I'll use the Grafton complex, I think is the easiest one to look at. There's $8 million there. It's not like we're spending $8 million starting tomorrow. This is money that's already been spent since the beginning of the year in FY20, and this just completes the rest of the project there. We already have the contracts with the vendor set up, so to cancel those contracts will be a cost should we do that. So the money's already there to finish these projects. Is that my understanding correct on that?
That's correct.
Okay. That's the only comment I just wanted to make, just so anybody watching would know that these are things that were already in the works that we're just kind of trying to finish up with money that we have.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess next, if there's no other questions, we're going to move on to the FY 2021 operating budget and also our health insurance update all in one fell swoop. So Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Before we go on to those presentations, I certainly want to extend my appreciation to Mr. Bowen, Dr. Carroll, Mr. Shearhart, and the rest of their team for, as you can imagine, making these changes is complicated. They really took a lot of time in prioritizing what needed to get done in a timely fashion. And I can't say enough about those guys and the work they've done. But I also want to take a minute to acknowledge Mr. Morgan and his team at the county. They've been supportive as they can with us related to the situation that we're in. And we've had numerous meetings with Mr. Morgan. Mr. Bowen has met with the finance team over at the county level, and they've been extremely supportive as we moved through making some of these very difficult decisions. So just wanted to share that. So next we have Mr. Bowen. I'll let him catch his breath and get ready for his next presentation. So the next presentation we're going to do is going to cover 3 items. First off will be the FY21 budget, followed by the FY20 remaining budget. And then we're going to have a discussion with the board related to health insurance, as well as some other funding sources that we have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowen.
Thank you again, Dr. Shandor, Mr. Richardson, members of the board. So this evening, I'll tell you, the FY21 budget is one that we've really struggled with. I'll quote the governor. When we started this process, when we started this budget season for FY21, the Virginia economy was on fire. Those are his words. And we were looking to do some great things in the budget. And so now with the pandemic and the state closures, there's been adjustments to state and local funding. So we've had to pull back, we've had to reprioritize, and we've put a lot of work and effort in this. And it's been very challenging because there's been a couple of things that have dropped off the budget since you first approved this back in March. So I just want to update the challenges, because what we're looking at here are challenges that we're addressing today as a result of the pandemic and the state closures. So we're looking at reductions in state and local funding for FY21. We do know of some of these reductions, and I'll share those with you. There's uncertainty with state and local economies. And right now, the state doesn't have a firm grasp on what these closures mean long-term for us. We know we have been provided with some cautions and warnings in FY20, and I'll talk about those. But moving into the next fiscal year, we just don't know the impact right now, the financial impact of next year's budget. The continuity of instruction in a virtual environment. This is new to a lot of school divisions, and it's certainly new to us when we're talking about the daily instruction of all of our students. So things that we're having to address, the summer academy and 2020 school year. The state superintendent has told school divisions to be prepared for a virtual environment at the start of the school year. And we've gone ahead and made that decision here in our school division to have summer academy in a virtual environment. So that's something we're continuing to work through with the committee, and we'll have additional information to provide for you. Uncertainty with the student growth and staff attrition. Certainly in difficult economic times, we don't see a lot of transitions with families moving. We know that the military has postponed a lot of their transitions. And so we feel like we needed to pull back on the numbers that we were originally using for student growth. We initially planned for a little over 200 and pulled back a little bit, and I'll walk through that a little later. And then also with staff attrition. This is funds. It's not new money, but it's money in our current budget that we capture and we can reallocate because we have folks that retire who are making higher salaries, and we reallocate those funds to different priorities depending on how much is available. So what we know at this point is the commitments for retirements at this point in the year are lower than they were this time last year. So we've had to pull back on that number as well. And then the needs for remediation in summer academy. We know that instruction has changed and the new instruction has changed. So we need to do some remediation. We just don't know what it's going to look like through summer academy or what it's going to look like at the beginning of next year. And certainly we're working through those challenges, but we feel like we needed to set some funds aside for those activities because it will require additional staffing and will require additional funds. So let me begin with the average daily membership. And this is, one of the important budget factors is your student enrollment. And as I mentioned, we had based our budget originally on 13,188. That was a little over 200 students. We backed that number down to 13,138. So we pulled back 50 students. And so that will certainly have a budgetary impact on the state side. One of the challenges that we typically talk about in the budget process, and you saw this in February in Dr. Shandor's presentation, is our economically disadvantaged students in this population. So we know that families have lost their jobs. We know that folks have been furloughed. And so we expect that when our students come back to us, that families are going to be at an economic disadvantage. Many of our families will be. So that we expect that this number and this population to grow. So that will be a challenge for us, and we'll need to address those needs as they come forward. So let me begin with FY21, and this was the projected budget that was presented in February. Our February budget was based on the governor's proposed budget, 13,188. That gave us $4.6 million in new money. The state, we also identified increases in reimbursements for our Children's Services Act and for the National Board Certification of $161,000. We increased our baseline in federal impact aid. So we have a baseline in our budget of $8.5 million. We expect to receive at least that much from the federal government for impact aid revenue. We've increased that by $200,000. And that was also done to offset the $200,000 in the county line item for revenue stabilization funds transfers to the school. So we started off with about 900,000 4 years ago, and we've been reducing that number. We reduced the 600,000 to 300,000. We have 200,000 in revenue stabilization funds this year, and we're eliminating that next year, but we're offsetting that with an increase in the impact aid baseline from 8.5 to 8.7. We have some minor adjustments to our federal grants, a decrease of 207,000. And then with the county side, we had requested the county to increase our operating budget by $1.1 million. And this would have been new money to our budget for FY21. And then we also adjusted local revenue. This is revenue that doesn't come from the county, but it's deemed local revenue because it doesn't come from the state or it doesn't come from the federal government. But it's revenue from tuition and fees, our leases, and for building rental. And we had estimated that to be at $57.7 million or $57,700. So for a total revenue increase, new money of $5.7 million. So this was great news for us. However, we moved forward, and the governor had proposed a couple things that happened. The General Assembly finished its work. We started with that $4.6 million. In the General Assembly's final budget, it provided us another $900,000. However, due to the pandemic and closures, the governor proposed several amendments that were adopted by the General Assembly, and this decreased our budget by $1.4 million. We also, again, revised the student population, 50 fewer, and that came to a cost of $255,000. And then the increases in CSA and National Board didn't change. So our new state revenue is $4,056,000. And then we looked at the county changes. We requested $1.1 million. We knew that the $200,000 was going away, so that was that adjustment to the federal revenue. But in the revised 21 appropriation from the county, we lost the 1.1, but in addition to that 1.1, they asked for an additional 500,000. And that 500,000 is currently in our budget. So we actually had to make a cut from our current budget. So a total of $1.6 million in the appropriation from the county. And then one good thing is that when we looked at the local revenue again, that number increased from 57,000 to 127,700. So the net change in local revenue was a negative $572,000. And then on the federal side, we had the adjustment to 200,000. We had the adjustment to federal grants of 207. And then we had an addition of 590,000. And this is the federal stimulus money coming to us in the CARES Act. And this is new money to us. We expect to receive this money at any time. However, we will carry this money forward to be used as new money in the FY21 budget. And board members, when we shared this information with you initially, we were provided with a preliminary number of about 530,000. We thought our final number would be about 560. However, it came in at 590. So that was good news. So our total federal revenue changes are $582,600. So here's a summary of our state and state, local, and federal revenue. And then, as I mentioned, we add back in the attrition because this is money that's been freed up in our budget from salaries and benefits, and we reallocate that to other priorities. When we started in February, this was 900,000, and we backed that down to 700,000. So the net additional resources available is $5.7 million. So let me talk about our priorities. So you're familiar with our three main priorities: instruction and learning, retention and recruitment, and compliance and safety. So under instruction and learning, we've added positions, one for an associate director of student services. This is really based on the need that we have in our special education department. This was also a recommendation that came out of our special ed program evaluation. We're adding 8 new teachers for growth. We're adding a half a lead counselor position, and we're adding 4 office clerks. Now, the 4 office clerks are currently in the budget. We added those this past summer as end of year. So had they not been funded, they would have gone away. However, we saw the need for these 4 because these 4 office clerks were added to our elementary schools with the highest student enrollment. And they also served to aid us in our student in registrations and student enrollment during July and August timeframe. And that helped us to better hire and plan for hiring moving into the school year. Because typically what happens is we we get these numbers in late August, and then we're hiring teachers into September. And so we needed to try and get a jump on those numbers, and these 4 office clerks helped us in that process. We're adding $250,000 for New Horizons. That's not a change from February. We increase in textbook, and we did add this to it. It's either textbook or technology replacement fund. We're going to look at that very, very closely and see if we can postpone any textbooks, but if we can, we're going to push that to technology replacement fund. We're increasing technology. This is new to $100,000, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on because of the new virtual instruction. We're proposing a one-to-one technology initiative, and this is added to support that initiative. Now, this $100,000 that was added really doesn't cover, I believe, the cost of what we'll need, but certainly we had funds in balancing the budget. So we wanted to at least provide some seed money there in for technology to jumpstart their needs. And then the remediation in Summer Academy. Again, we know there's going to be some remediation that's needed either at Summer Academy or at the beginning of the school year. We needed to set aside some funding for that need, and that comes at $50,000. We'll continue with the high school esports program at $30,000. And then professional development for virtual instruction. As you know, we've contracted with a new virtual learning platform, and most of the professional development was going to be done in-house, and it's by the instruction department, and that is still the plan. However, with all the changes that we're seeing and the need to deploy a virtual environment for Summer Academy and the start of the year, we felt like we needed to have some assistance from the vendor in this, so we needed to set some funds aside for professional development. You recall in February under retention and recruitment, we had proposed a 2% increase across the board for all staff. This included a step, and it also included a market adjustment. However, in the revised local and state funding, we had to take the employee compensation off the table. This was a very difficult decision because this is always one of our priorities. One of our top priorities is employee compensation. However, what we lost in total funding was in upwards of $2 million. So this was the biggest ticket item, and this was this really left us no choice but to take this off the table. And I will say this is in line with most school divisions across the state and certainly within our region. So the quadrennial review, this is a review that we do every 4 years of our group of employees. We're continuing with this at a cost of $114,000, and this group of 1 employees represents some of our lowest paid employees, with our office clerks and secretaries included. We're adding transportation area supervisors from 11 months, increasing them to 12 months. And this is really to help out with that summer planning, because as we're enrolling new students, we need to get a jump on those students in our transportation system, and that's going to help us do that. We're also adding a transportation scheduler at a cost of $36,000. We had 2 schedulers prior to the last recession. We've needed to add this back, and this will again help us support the needs in transportation. And then regrade speech language pathologists. We've had quite the challenge of hiring speech language pathologists as employees. And if we can't hire them as employees, we still need the service. So we've been required to go out to contract. So we've had a contract for these SLPs, and it's been very difficult. It comes at a much higher cost. So we believe that this is just a small increase that will help us save money in the long run, because bringing them on as employees is much cheaper than contracting for the service. If we can go to compliance and safety, we're adding a half a counselor, school counselor position, 1 EL teacher, 4 special education teachers, and 7 special education paras. And this is for growth in the special education department. We had planned to add 2 school resource officers. That came at a cost of $260,000. However, because of the cost, we felt that this was something that we could set as a priority for next year and reallocate those funds for other priorities in light of a new norm for budget. We have a mandate for increase in VRS benefits, $835,000. This is because our VRS rates were increased by the VRS Board of Trustees. They were also adopted by the General Assembly, so this is a mandated cost. Our increase to Children's Services Act is also a mandated cost because these are students that if we can't educate here in our school division and we can't have them educated at New Horizons, then we have to privately place those students. And we've seen an increase over the past couple of years, and we're expecting an increase for next year. So the cost to balance out those funds is, or that program is $350,000. We have an increase in our athletic trainer contract for athletic trainers that are middle and high schools. That comes at a cost of $10,000. But also we've seen an increase in the cost of football helmet reconditioning. And this is something that our schools, our middle and high schools, have seen as an increase in cost. And they really didn't have the funds in their athletic budget to cover this cost. So we felt that this was a safety concern, and we wanted to take that off the schools. And that came at a cost of $18,000. And then the increase in health insurance costs. This comes at $1 million. This is just the employer's share of the health insurance cost. When we went through our renewal period this past year, the consultant was recommending an increase of more than 24%. We chose to do something less than 24%. And this is just our cost of that increase. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because there are some costs that will be assumed by the employer. So here's just a comparison of the changes, funds that we had available at February, $6.6 million. That included $900,000 in attrition. The May, now it's $4.7 million, which includes $700,000 for attrition. And so there's been some changes to the buckets. Instruction and learning, we've seen an increase of about $400,000. We've seen a decrease in retention and recruitment by about $2 million. In compliance and safety, we've seen a decrease by about $260,000. And so we have balanced our budget. Our expenditures at $4.7 million in light of the new revenue at 4.7. And so the superintendent's proposed budget for FY21 will be a total of $149,560,000. This is an increase of about 2.77%. And we'll be presenting this again to the board May 18th for their adoption. And any questions on changes and revisions to the FY21 budget?
I have a couple questions. So when we talk about the CARES Act funding, can you just talk a little bit about what that's based on and how we compare to our neighbors?
Yes. So the CARES Act, again, we had $590,000. Those funds were distributed to schools based on the Title I population. And to give you some comparison, our neighbors in Hampton received somewhere between $6 and $7 million. Newport News was upwards of $9 million, and we received 590. So when we look at other school divisions and what they're doing with their budgets, I would caution people just to understand that the stimulus money that came to us, there were big disparities in those funds. So again, we have $590,000 to incorporate, and really that's just covering the reduction that we received from the county of $500,000. So our neighbors who have a higher population of Title I students receive significantly more funding in stimulus funds.
Can I keep going with my questions?
Sure.
All right, so the 8 new teachers that were listed, when you're looking at the projected growth and you reduce that number by 50 students, was that 8 new teacher number adjusted as well, or was it left at 8?
We left the teacher number at 8. We felt like we needed to build in some cushion for us. I mean, we could see those numbers the original numbers come to fruition. But I really didn't want to change that number because it's just a place. It's a placeholder for right now. If we don't see that number, then that will free up some additional money. It'd be about $130,000 that it would free up to be used in other areas of the budget. But as I caution the board and caution the community about the budget that we presented here tonight, because of the uncertainty in the economy, we don't know that there won't be additional cuts into the new year. So we need to have some reserve built in, and this is just a small amount that we built in to cover some additional cuts if they come forward. But what we're doing right now as far as hiring, we're not hiring those full 8. We will wait until late July, early August to see how our numbers, our enrollment numbers look before we move to approve those final 2.
Okay. Now, under compliance and safety, you had the 0.5 school counselor, 2 slides ahead. I think there was the other 0.5. So it ends up equaling the 0.5 of a lead counselor, 0.5 of a school counselor. But the other ones that were listed under compliance and safety, how many of those are mandated, state mandated or federal mandated? Were the EL teachers, the special ed paras or special ed teachers, were those mandated?
So the EL teacher was actually a governor proposed ratio. It was a change to the ratio. So that is a mandated cost.
Okay.
The special education teachers and paras are mandated because of the need increase in population and demand for services.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, as I remember the at the special education presentation that we had, we needed more teachers than paras. Are we looking at in the future of equaling those numbers?
So I may have to defer to Elaine Gould, who I believe is on the meeting. But yes, we look at this. She stays on top of these numbers,
Okay.
looking at caseloads, looking at the needs and disabilities of our special education students. So there is a formula that she has to abide by in recommendations. So these are things that she consistently looks at. And these will often change even throughout the year, because when we start with a number in September, that number may increase well into November and December. So we're seeing a fluctuation of students, particularly in the special education population. Mm-hmm. And so we're consistently having to adjust and hire additional paras or teachers throughout the year. That's pretty common.
Yeah, the other thing to pay attention to here, Mr. Schaefer, would be the expansion of our programs. So if we open up a new program for our communication students or behavior programs, when you add a teacher, there's specific ratios there for the number of students, with the number of paras with the teacher as well. So Ms. Skinner, I know, is on the call as well. Ms. Skinner, would you like to weigh in?
That's correct. Some of our self-contained programs throughout the school division are reaching their capacity, and even this year we've had to look at opening additional programs, and so some of those teachers would be used to increase those programs. And then typically there is at least one paraeducator that is allotted to that classroom as well. Sometimes it's more than that. It just really depends on the program. And Elaine is not on this call. She's listening, but she's not here.
I'm sorry.
I hope that was okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So I just have one comment, and I know we had talked about that we're looking at the one-to-one initiative for continuity of learning and instruction, and I'm glad that we're taking a slow approach. We're doing what we can to do that. I've read some articles about some divisions that kind of jumped into it and really fell flat on their face. I don't want to dumb any divisions out across the state, but it just didn't work for them. That this is something you can't just flip a light switch and make it happen. And I appreciate your work on that. I know you're exploring that right now.
We are, and we can certainly get into more of that once we get to the FY20 budget and the reserves. Mr. Bowen can share that piece when we get there. And if we want to, we can have Dr. Carroll weigh in as well, as he's leading a task force group related to that initiative.
Okay, and one last thing before, I don't want to forget this. I want to thank Mr. Bowen and his team. They've worked tirelessly on the CIP, the 20 budget, the 21 budget, with all these big changes within the last 6 to 8 weeks. So I appreciate all their work and their time and devotion to everything there. So I didn't want to forget that at the end. So I wanted to mention that now. So
and for being available to answer all of our questions.
yeah,
That's true.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and as you know, I mean, as you're looking at those budget adjustments, we really grappled over a lot of those decisions. Reprioritizing and having to deal with multiple budgets being cut, whether it's the CIP, the operating budget, et cetera. The team really had to prioritize. And the last thing on earth you want to do is not give folks compensation increases, because they work so hard all the time anyway. And given these circumstances, they're really doing a wonderful job meeting the needs of our students and our communities, quite frankly, helping the families and parents work through these trying times. So really difficult decisions here, but again, making sure that we prioritize, have a balanced budget, and can move forward on a number of different fronts, I think is important. And again, I appreciate the board's recognition of Mr. Bowen. He's done a tremendous job leading these efforts.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead. You can continue on.
All right, so Mr. Bowen, do you want to move into the FY20 budget update?
Yes. So let's talk about some challenges that we've been faced with just with the current fiscal year. So certainly there's uncertainty with the remaining state revenue. Through our several briefs with the state superintendent, we've been cautioned about sales tax revenue. We should be watching the remaining revenue that we're expected throughout the year, and it's about $4.2 million. We haven't been told what percentage to look at because the state doesn't really know. They're just cautioning us because they are expecting less state revenue, and certainly that's going to impact us. The other thing that they've updated us with is with lottery revenue. They cautioned us to watch our lottery revenue because at the last board meeting in April, just that day, the lottery department announced that March sales had declined 28% over the previous year. So we're looking at specific line item in revenue. In lottery revenue, and it's the supplemental per pupil allocation. It's our largest line item. And so we have set aside 30% of that remaining revenue in conjunction with some of our sales tax revenue in reserve. Again, the needs for remediation in Summer Academy. So if we're going to start Summer Academy remediation, that's actually going to start in this fiscal year, and we didn't have a budget for that. So we're looking to allocate funding for that, and that will largely come out of our end of year funds. And then the continuity of instruction in the virtual environment. This is, as Dr. Shandor mentioned, the task force that Dr. Carroll is leading. It's the initial implementation of one-to-one technology. And our plan has been to use one-time funds. And I'll walk through that in just a minute because it's important to note that while there are some one-time funds available to us, we don't typically use one-time funding in an operating budget to sustain ongoing initiatives, particularly compensation or mandated expenditures for like hiring new employees or covering increases in health insurance. But I do want to walk you through some details about that. And then I want to talk about food services because we have historically have had a very strong food service program. The fund balance in food services has been relatively stable between $1.1 million and $1.3 million. However, what we've seen with the closure of the Grafton complex due to the fire, where our largest population was only going to school 3 days a week, we started to see an initial decline in revenue. And now with that, all schools are closed, and we're not seeing meals sold at the level that we were seeing them or provided at the at the level, we've seen a decline in food service revenues. So we'll need to walk through that a little bit. I don't know where we'll end up because we're still working through that process. However, if we come with a shortfall, that shortfall has to be made up from our operating fund. And we don't have a line item in our operating fund for food services because it has been self-sufficient for so many years. So let's move on to the next slide. And I wanted to give the board and the community just an overview of our fund balances. These are the funds in our school division. Of course, our operating fund is our largest fund. And when we started looking at fund balances in April, we were projecting April 30th an end of year fund balance of $2.5 million. Now we look at that, and that's pretty high for us. We generally end the year at about 600,000 to 900,000. But what makes up this fund are a number of things, this fund balance. One, unfilled positions. Also, we've seen less utilities at the Grafton complex because that system or that complex has been shut down since February. Now that all schools have been closed, we're only running schools at about 5 to 10% capacity. And so we're seeing savings in utility costs. We're seeing savings in fuel because the majority of our buses are not running on the road. So that's been significant savings for us. So there's also other areas, the cost of overtime that we pay for athletic events for our bus drivers, remediation services that we typically pay this time of year to our teachers. We're not seeing those costs. So those are largely making up the balance of that $2.5 million. And then if you look at the next line down, the $2.7 million in there in red, it's revenue reduction for sales tax and lottery. That's money that we're expecting to receive. We were expecting to receive. However, we've taken that off the books, so to speak. We've reduced our sales tax revenue and lottery revenue by $2.7 million in anticipation of the effects of the new economy. We certainly could expect that maybe some of that money will come to us, and if it does, say if $700,000 of that 2.7 comes to us, then that will just move up to our estimated fund balance to the $2.5 million. So that's just a number we feel conservative with right now in reducing our budgets in preparation of ending the year in the black. I talked about food services, and again, at April 30th, we were at $760,000, and we generally end the year at somewhere between 1.1 to 1.3, so we're about $570,000 off at this point. However, my staff is still working through the process of unencumbering a number of purchase orders for food purchases and for our contract with Sodexo, who is our contractor for food service. So I expect that number to increase, but right now, that's where we stand. The Revenue Stabilization Fund, this is our reserve fund. This was set up back in the early 90s with an agreement between the Board of Supervisors and the school board. And as I mentioned, impact aid, we have a baseline in our budget for $8.5 million. So any funding that comes in above that $8.5 million, those funds are deposited into the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and that's considered one-time money. We like to have a strong reserve fund in case of an economic downturn, and what we're currently experiencing, this is why you have that reserve fund. But if you look at the impact aid revenue at $2.2 million, those are $2.2 million of addition to our baseline for this year. So I want to stop right here just for a moment and talk about what our plan is with this one-time money. So we've talked about the one-to-one initiative for a computer device for all of our students. So we've presented this plan to the county. They're very supportive of it, but we want to take this $2.2 million and then $1 million from our operating fund balance of the $2.5 million. And we want to set up a technology reserve fund. And this will provide the funding for that one-to-one initiative, just the initial funding. This is going to be a very expensive initiative, but we need to have those funds set aside. So the plan is set aside $3.2 million, and then we'll enter into a lease purchase agreement, and that the payments for that technology will be paid over a 3 to 4 year term, but the funding the large part of the funding will already be set aside in a technology reserve fund. So to make those payments. So that's the plan that we have for our one-to-one initiative. And I'd like to bring in Dr. Carroll, because Dr. Carroll is leading this committee. And if you would like to add anything to this conversation, Dr. Carroll.
Yes, I would just add that that is kind of the base funding. And we would obviously, if we move to a device for every child, then there are going to be some efficiencies that we'll pick up along the way. Units that we're not putting in the building, laptop carts, computer labs, and things like that. So we're going to be seeing a shift in how we use devices in the building, and there will be efficiencies as we move along. But just what we're doing right now is we've got a task force looking at it, worked with Mr. Bowen on trying to come up with some practical numbers of what we'll need to move this forward, and we believe we're there. We're basing all the work on a 2017 study of the 15 effective characteristics of any one-to-one initiative. And so that's kind of the baseline of where we're starting. And so we're looking at right now of identifying what are the devices, especially what's developmentally appropriate at younger ages. IT is looking at the logistics and the infrastructure that they're going to need and pacing that work out. Instruction, a big piece is going to be the professional development for not only the students, but also for parents and the teachers that will be involved in this. And then the last piece is how we're going to ensure access with students to make sure everybody's connected to the internet.
Perfect.
Okay. Any questions on the one-to-one initiative?
Just a quick comment. I know Dr. Carroll mentioned a baseline study dating back to the 17 timeframe, and I'm sure you are, just remain attuned to all the lessons that are being derived, as a result of the COVID dynamic, not only within the state and our neighbors, but, nationally, certainly. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'll continue on with the 20 update. We go back one time, I believe. Here we go. So the health insurance fund, the current balance of the health insurance fund is at $1.2 million. Again, this is as of April 30th. This has created a lot of concern and a lot of conversations with us, not only with the county, but also with our consultant. What we've seen as a balance as of 2 years ago was close to $6 million. However, there's been a number of things that created or have caused this reserve fund balance to decline. First is we've been seeing a number of years of growth. So we've added new employees. Employees have added their children and have added their spouses. As you know, last year we switched from Anthem and went to Cigna. We did so based on some very good data provided by the consultant and through the RFP process. We saw fewer administrative fees, and we saw significant savings through the pharmacy. However, one of the things that we couldn't see and was very hard to predict, and still very hard to predict, are the discounts that we see or that we receive through our providers. And those providers, the hospitals and the doctors. So what we've learned through this process is that because Anthem at the time was a much bigger player in this market, they had a little better discount than Cigna did. And so when you look at all three of these things, they've all added to some increase in cost. We also have a population that's much different from the county. So when we looked at our costs compared to the county, we were seeing actual increase in cost because some of the procedures that our population have undergone have actually come at a greater cost than the county staff and the procedures that their staff have undergone. So just a number of factors in this. So what we started to do is in the fall, we started meeting with our consultant, looking at ways that we can identify to cut the cost and identify why these costs have increased. And just recently, we had a meeting with both county and school division, and we identified a number of things, and we'll be looking to improve on some things moving forward. We also looked at as an option to go back out to bid to see if that would possibly change some of the cost structures for us. However, at this time, we decided not to take that step. We did recently learn after our last meeting with the consultant in the county that Cigna had gone back to renegotiate discounts with providers, Riverside back in July, but also with Bon Secours and Centera as late or as early as of January of this year. So there had been some movement in the areas where we saw some of the bigger increases, and that was in the discount. So we're very hopeful that we're going to see some of that, the benefits of those renegotiated discounts moving forward. However, this still does provide some concern for us, and the fact that there's a lot of unknown. We are a self-funded program, and the experience is the experience. So if all of a sudden we have a bad year and we have a lot of people who are sick and they're going to the doctor, then of course our health insurance costs are going to increase. We've been very fortunate because the previous 5 years we had a relatively stable experience. And over the past 2 years, we've seen an increase in the population, and that population, we've also seen an increase in the use of the services. So we'll continue to watch this, but with a lot that we have going on right now, the fact that we had to take the 2% increase compensation off the table, we are pushing an increase in premiums to employees. And we presented this in the February presentation, gave a little history of health insurance for the school division. And I'll just remind the board back from 2011 to 2020, so over a 10-year period, the average increase to the employee was about 2.7% in premium costs. So the school division has done an outstanding job holding our employees harmless in health insurance. We were set to increase our health insurance premiums, not because we wanted to, but because there was a need. And we had held our employees harmless for so long. This was the time we had to increase our premiums. However, it just comes now at a time where the pandemic hit us. This was something that we didn't plan for. And we had planned for, in fact, to offset the premiums increase to employees with a compensation increase. But because we've taken the compensation increase off the table, we cannot take the increase in health insurance off the table. So we're having to move forward with that. Now, I want to add this as an important note. The increase won't take effect until December, because when we went to Cigna, we realigned our plan dates from an October plan date to a January plan date. So employees will only see an increase starting in December, not as of July. So that is the one positive that comes from this new news and the update in the FY21 budget. Now I'll move to workers' comp fund. This is a fund that has remained relatively stable over the past few years, $2.5 million. I will tell you that the fund here is kind of a fallback fund really for health insurance. If we don't see a reduction in cost, we will use the workers' comp fund to transfer funds into the health insurance fund to shore costs. And something else about health insurance, and this comes from the governor's brief. He mentioned that when the state looks at the economy as a result of the closures, if the economy does recover into the fall and into next year, one of the things that the governor will look to, and one of his priorities will be to reinstate the compensation, the 2% compensation increase that was taken off the table. So again, if that happens, we will look to see how we can incorporate that 2% increase or any increase that's provided next January. And we'll look to see how we can offset the cost to employees based on their increase in premiums for FY21. And then, as I mentioned in the CIP update, that $1.9 million was available cash that was already appropriated, that we reallocated to projects. The York High roof, that was the $1.6 million that we had available. That was reallocated, and it was reallocated to cover Coventry Year 2, Grafton Year 2, and that new Grafton project for the PA intercom system. So we are estimated to have somewhat of a small cash balance from our cash projects moving into FY21. And that's the update for this evening on FY20 and on health insurance. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I would just like to point out, Mr. Bowen, and I'm glad you mentioned it, that I know there may be an increase in our insurance, but should the state's budget get refined, there's always a possibility, and that's the governor's goal and objective, if the economy is better, to try to reinstate some of that compensation. So, you know, we don't know. It's all an unknown right now, but I'm glad you covered all that, so we know that there could be some hope in the future, hopefully. Any other questions or comments from the board?
One very quick question. The Mr. Bowen, the 2.7 million that you captured, is that based on, you know, historical revenue rates and run rates? Is that how that was derived?
The $2.7 million that we set in reserve for this fiscal year really was a large part of that came from conversations with other finance directors, my peers across the state, because we weren't able to, the state wasn't able to give us a percentage to use for sales tax revenue. We just felt like we needed to be really conservative on this because we just don't know. The state doesn't know and we don't know. We're hearing different things from the county side that maybe state sales tax, it may not be as bad because of the run on the groceries and the food. You've seen it, go to the store, grocery store, it's been hard to find some of the staples. So people have been spending money, but food tax, the sales tax on food is much less than sales tax on other goods and materials. So certainly it's just a precaution based on the caution that was provided to us from the state superintendent. Now, the other part of that, the $700,000, that came from a percentage that was provided to us by the state superintendent. He told us to set aside 30% of our supplemental per pupil allocation that comes from lottery funding. Because if this reduction is true, then that's where those funds will be reduced from. So from that line item. So that's where that number came from. We are very optimistic that it won't be the full $2.7 million, and that our end of year fund balance will be higher. But again, if those funds are higher, these are one-time funds, and typically what happens with our end of year fund balance, they come back to us. We ask the board in the fall to reappropriate those. We send it to the Board of Supervisors for their request to reappropriate, and they are generally reappropriated for cash capital, for technology, for buses, and for textbooks.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for that presentation. Dr. Shandor, was there anything else?
No, I think certainly Mr. Bowen's done a pretty thorough job this evening trying to work through these difficult times. We've had a lot of problem-solving sessions, as you might imagine. But if the board has any other additional questions, we can certainly entertain those now.
I just had a brief statement, and then I do have one last question. Obviously, I'm pretty passionate about mental health, and I know this is top of your mind, but I just want to I hope it stays there, that we really don't have any idea of the impact that this quarantine and what these kids are going through at home is going to have. And we really won't know until we actually get them back in our buildings. And so I just think we need to keep top of mind that we've got to make sure that our counselors are in place and ready. And I don't know, I just think that's really important. But my question is, can you just really quickly speak to the process that we're in right now about making decisions about graduation? I know we have a lot of families who are just waiting on the edge of their seat, but if you would just briefly speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I want to touch on the first comment first, and I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like we've done a really good job in communicating with our families, with our teachers, communicating with them. When you think about elementary, middle, and high school, we have a number of different strategies for how that's done. Elementary, it's pretty easy, right? They've got 24 to 27 students. And so at our elementary level, we're actually tracking who have we contacted, who have we been able to get in contact with, and who we haven't. And then whoever we haven't, we've enlisted the resources to go out and make sure that we're making those connections for those families. We've done the same thing at the middle and the high school level. We put some pretty straightforward expectations on teachers for what those calls look like. We're tracking down to the individual student at every level to know, are these students responding? Are they, getting their work done? Teachers are providing that feedback to those students. So I feel like as far as the current conditions that we're in, we're doing a really nice job of making those connections with our families, and we're utilizing our counselors, social workers, and other resources that we have. So that's sort of that one topic. Secondly, regarding graduation, we know that's certainly on the minds of a lot of our families, and we certainly don't like the situation we're in for our 2020 graduates. I can tell you that Dr. Aaron Butler, as I've mentioned to board members sort of in one-on-one conversations, a week or two ago, probably 2 weeks ago, began the process of working with all of our regional contacts. So all 15 school divisions, he's been in this group sharing thoughts and ideas around graduation and what that might look like. I'll ask him to share that in just a minute. But we've also started a committee related to this with students at each of the high schools, some parents from each of the high schools, obviously the principals, some counselors and others, to review options and hear thoughts and concerns from the kids and from the families. We're certainly committed to doing anything we can to be innovative, to make something memorable out of this and make it as positive as possible. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Butler. He can share a little bit about that committee. And then let me finish with this first. We also have a meeting tomorrow with the Secretary of Education, Mr. Carney, as well as the State Superintendent, James Lane. He has a conversation with all 132 superintendents tomorrow about graduation. So it could be sharing thoughts and ideas around it, but I'm sure one big part of it will be whatever you come up with, make sure you're obeying the restrictions from the governor. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Yes, all the principals in the division are committed to making sure that our seniors have a meaningful experience to culminate the year. And so we're looking at a variety of options on the task force. It's been very helpful to hear what other school divisions are doing and trying to plan to do. So we're taking all that feedback, everything that we find from other school divisions, not just here in Region 2. We've even looked at what school divisions are doing in Northern Virginia, out in the western part of the state, so that we have a full list of options to consider when we have our committee meetings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. And I know it's difficult because some of these school divisions are small and they have one high school. That's much different than one that has 3 or 4 high schools or one that has 20 high schools. So I certainly understand the challenges there. Thank you. Thank you very much for all the hard work on that. All right, no other questions from board members? We're gonna finish this meeting. So I want to thank everyone for their presentations tonight and the helpful information they provided, especially under the current challenging circumstances that we're having to deal with. But our next regular meeting will be held virtually on Monday, May the 18th at 5 p.m. And I hope everyone has a great week. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.